I thought we'd share a distraction. There's just a lot going on, and a lot of people are staying at home, and they're trying new things. They're trying hobbies, or they're maybe being forced to brew coffee for themselves instead of buy it out. So what I thought I would do is just share what I do with coffee when somebody gives me coffee that isn't something we roast. So actually somebody did give us some coffee, gave us this bag. It's from Tokyo. I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but it looks like it would be Fuglin coffee. So it's from Tokyo. It's a Kenyan AA. So the first thing I do when I get a new coffee that I have no idea about this roastery or sort of what they're about or what they are hoping to accomplish, the first thing I'll do is I'll just open the bag and I'll look at the beans. And you can kind of look at the beans and kind of decide what the degree of roast is. So these look pretty blonde. So I'd say, hey, these are very this is a kind of very Nordic, modern, third wave approach to coffee. And then the next thing I would do is I actually eat the bean. And what that does is I don't know, it gives me a sense. It gives me a sense of maybe how much of the cultivar is going to be present in the cup versus how much of the roast process is going to be present in the cup. Also give me an idea of the density of the coffee. So if it's really hard, I'll know that maybe the roast isn't super uniform. So for this particular coffee, it seems like they are leaning more towards trying to find the expression of the cultivar, the varietal, as opposed to the roast process. And it's not particularly dense or hard. It didn't break my teeth trying to chew on it and taste it. So I would say overall it seems like the roast is pretty uniform. And so my approach would be probably very similar to an approach I would take for one of our coffees. I would probably set up a brewing ratio that's about 1 gram of coffee to about 15 grams of water. That would be my first pass at this coffee. And I would grind it. Essentially, this is my advice I give to anybody. Anytime you get a new coffee, wherever your grinder is, kind of find the midpoint and maybe grind there for your first cup. So if your grinder goes from 1 to 15, do 7.5, and then see what that does to your cup, and then make micro adjustments around that based on the time you're trying to get your brew time to be. So anyways, to save time, I've already pre-ground this. I'm going to brew with this Phoenix. I sort of have a crush on this brewing device of recent, but basically it's got the same sort of angle of inclination as a 3-cup Chemex, and it uses filter paper that's very similar to Chemex filter paper. I'm a big fan of cone brewing devices. We rely almost exclusively on something like the D60 here in the shop, but I'm also a big fan of the Chemex. This is a 6-cup Chemex. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I decided to brew on this ball jar just so you guys can see what this looks like. And then I'm going to get some hot water, which I've already done. And I'm going to wet the filter. I'm just going to saturate the filter. I'm going to try and eliminate any sort of paper taste that may be in the filter. I just want the filter to be wet and saturated so that I can get to my brewing quickly. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a ratio of 1 gram of coffee to about 15 grams of water. This is kind of our approach based on the roast level we put our coffees under, our express. I would say as a general rule, if you get coffee and it's dark and oily or inky, probably start with a ratio that's 1:17, so more water. If you get something where you do this bean test, where you crunch on the bean and you get a little more of the roast impression, still cultivar, it won't be dark by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe you get a little bit more smoky kind of roast drum expression. I would look at 1:16, maybe 1:16.5, and then if you get stuff that's super Nordic, I think 1:15 is a good starting point. You go a little bit lower. I would say, this would just be a personal preference of mine, I would say if you're doing brewed coffee, I would never go below 1:13, and I probably wouldn't explore 1:13 very often. I think 1:15 or slightly under that is a good starting point for something very Nordic and light. And then as you get a little darker, I would go up to 1:17 and probably not exceed that. So anyways, what does that mean? So it means I'm going to take 23 grams of ground coffee. Our grinder goes up to 22. I ground this at 12.5. so almost midpoint, so it's a little bit finer than the midpoint. I'm just trying to shake in here 22 grams of coffee. And I've got 22 grams roughly. I'm going to shake it to level the bed. Then my scale, I've got a timer and the scale, of course. I'm going to start the scale. This coffee did come from Japan, so it was a little bit old. So I'm going to only give it a 30-second bloom, and I'm just going to move the kettle in any which way I can, just so I can get this saturated and completely wet. My bloom is roughly 2 times the mass of the coffee. So 23 grams, my bloom was 46 grams, a little bit more. It wasn't perfect, but that would be my approach. And because this is a little bit older, it's not outgassing a lot. You don't get to see this, but I'm just going to do a 30-second bloom. And then I'm going to start adding my brew weight. I'm going to do it in pulses, and I'm going to do it slowly, but probably 100 gram pulses is what I'm going to aim at. I'm just going to see how this behaves. I'm mainly going to stick to the middle of the bed, but as the bed comes up a little bit closer to the bloom line, I will do a little spiral just to kind of wash the edge and try and get a little bit flatter bed for this. So that was we're about 1 minute and 10 seconds in. We have about 150 total grams of water. That includes the bloom. And what I'm doing is I'm letting it run down, but not run dry, but get very, very close to sort of being dry, just when I'm about ready to see the rounds. And then I'm going to add the next little bit of water. Again, another 100 grams roughly, so I'm going to try and pause it at 250, but I'm kind of paying attention to where my bloom line is. I don't want to exceed that. I don't want to fill up all the headspace in here. So I'm getting close to about 225, so I'm going to do another little spiral around the edges to kind of wash and come back in the middle. And now I'm at 250, I'm going to pause. It's about 2 minutes in, so I feel pretty comfortable right now with this. I'm trying to get a brew time that's going to be just a little over 3 minutes is what I'm hoping for. Last night it was just a little under 3 minutes, and so I feel like we can do a better job. So again, the water is sort of leaving the bed, and I can see just the beginning of the ground coffee, and I'm going to go back in for my last pulse. Slow, center, middle of the bed. Again, I'm going to fill till I get to the bloom line again. Slow, and then as I get a little closer to my end brew weight, I'm going to give it one last little spiral. So I stopped at 325. That's approximately 1 gram of coffee to 15 milliliters of water. I'm at 250 now. I still can see some water in here. My bed looks pretty flat. My sides, maybe just some fines, something more fibrous, but very, very clean. I know it's kind of hard to see, but you know, this is kind of amazing to me. You know, nothing's like leaking out or coming over this edge here. So the filter is holding it in the envelope. That's about 315. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with this last night. So I feel pretty good about the brew time. One reason I like this brewing device is I think it produces a nice sweet cup, and it also puts the cup at a temperature, even when you're not using glass to brew into. It puts it at a temperature that I think is a little bit more drinkable for me. I like things not overly hot, so I like the idea that I can immediately get into the cup and start exploring it. Because this is more like a 3-cup Chemex, I kind of am leaning into what I would aim for in a 3-cup Chemex, so that would be 3+ minutes. I probably wouldn't try and push it beyond 4 minutes. 3.5 minutes might be more ideal, but because it's a little different than a Chemex, I'm kind of maybe leveraging a little bit of my V60 experience. And so my V60 intuition has always been over 2.5 minutes, maybe up to 3 minutes, and in certain instances about 3:15. So this was 3:15. And what I like to do then next is, once we sort of brew it is you're going to taste it. Pour it in a small little cup. I personally really like tiny cups. I like to drink the coffee in tiny cups because it does a couple of things. It cools off the coffee quick, but it does still allow me to taste the coffee at temperature. So you want to taste it hot, but I want to get to really where I think the sweet spot for these coffees are going to be, and that's going to be a temp that is somewhat off brew temp. I'm always a little frustrated personally when people serve coffee in a 10-ounce mug. So if I go to a shop and I get a brewed cup of coffee and they give it to me all at once in the volume and then that I have to drink it out of, I find it a little unsettling. So anyways, this is about a 4-ounce cup. Pour a little about halfway in. Kind of check out the aromatics. I feel like the aromatics often are the first things that sort of leave the cup, or not leave the cup, obviously, right? Aromatics, but they're fleeting. So it's best to get them when the cup's hot, and as the cup cools, it's a lot harder to get that clear impression of what the aromatics of the coffee are. So for this coffee, I kind of get a black tea, maybe a black currant. There's a definite kind of earth component, but clean, not dirty or roasty, but just fresh, just like spring. Maybe just turn the soil a little bit. Very positive earth impression. I think most people try and help you out on your journey when you get a new coffee, and they include some cup characteristic or cup impressions. We do the same thing. Let's see what we get here. We've got rose hips, blueberry jam, and cherry. So sounds super promising. It's a Kenyan, so certainly possible in the cup. So let's see what we get. So I could definitely see that impression of cherry. I could say, hey, maybe coffee cherry, maybe something like a tobacco leaf, which in my opinion kind of has a cherry, or kind of a suggestion of maybe a cola. And the rose hips, yeah, I can see that too. I mean, you could lead me in that direction. There is a tea-like aspect in the aromatics. There was that kind of note of a black currant. So I could be easily led that way. The body is, of course, pretty light, so that's pretty much the case with a lot of lighter roast. You are going to get more cup clarity and maybe just a little less body, especially the brew method is going to yield less body than, say, if we did something like a French press. It's not super jammy, so I think the blueberry jam is a little bit of a reach for me. It's definitely sweet, and that's maybe you could tell that from like me identifying the cola or like a sweet tobacco leaf, but it's not super jammy to me. And again, it could be maybe it's the age. And I would also, again, it's like hard to suggest it's blue. It could be maybe something more red or plummy. But again, these notes, I mean, we do it all the time. Sometimes it's a stretch. Sometimes these notes are really obvious. Like my guess is probably like cherry was probably easy. Rose hips was a little bit of a hyperbole, kind of based on the like black tea or black currant aspect of the cup. A little bit of the dryness. It's definitely delicate. Because of that little bit of the dryness, maybe there's a juiciness that results. Your mouth feels kind of like you salivate a little bit, so you get this impression of juicy. So I could see jam, maybe, or fruit juice of some sort, but these are guidelines. This is just a stretch, and I don't know how they brewed it, so maybe they brewed it in a different way where it accented some of this stuff. And again, these aren't, this isn't like an ingredient label. It's not like the listing is the percentage in which they occur. Again, we are guilty of this. We try and at least give people 3 notes. Sometimes we come up with more, but at least 3 notes to kind of start their journey. And, you may find more, you may find less. Some of them will be easier, some of them will be harder. But it's just an outline for you to kind of help you dial in your your coffee journey with one particular coffee, or it's a way of like sharing a somewhat subjective experience at a distance and trying to make it a little more objective to say, hey, this is what I got. I'm going to call you on the phone. What are you getting? You know, so people that are cube graders, people that do this for a living, you know, they try and create some sort of alignment of their palates, so that if I'm halfway around the world and we're trying the same coffee, we can hopefully come up with the same notes. Some of these notes are provided by sort of the middle people, the importers that bring coffees in that would sell it to a roaster. I think that the important thing about this whole thing is that it's not a test. It's not putting pressure on you to get a right answer or a wrong answer. It is, hopefully, it is a very pleasant ritual and treat that you give yourself, and that there are many sort of experience points on the curve of what this coffee represents, or any coffee represents. And if a roaster is bringing in a quality green coffee and doing, you know, an intentional and thoughtful job with that coffee, you know, they're basically imparting their own personal philosophy and personal interpretation of each coffee that they're packaging and sharing with guests. And so it shouldn't be frustrating. So I'll give you an example. You know, recently I tried to learn to play drums. I'll never be great. I'm too old to be great at anything really anymore. But it can be rewarding and frustrating. If I don't say to myself, I need to take this to some point so I can do X, if I just do it, I enjoy it. If I say, hey, I need to get to this point and I need to get there fast, I find the experience extremely frustrating. So I think if you know, sheltering in place, staying at home for the next couple of weeks, as you collect different coffees from different roasteries, and as you explore those coffees, I think there's a scaffolding in which you can explore that space as a starting point, but don't get frustrated if your brew is in 3 minutes, 15 seconds, or if you don't get blackberry or blueberry jam from the cup, or, you know, or you have to walk away because you have to answer the phone and you come back and your bed is dry and you have to be like, oh, well, do I throw it away or do I just add water and finish it? I would just add water and finish it. It should be a reward for yourself where you don't feel like you have to just nail this simple pocket or this sort of narrow pocket to get the right expression for the cup. It is an organic product. There are many expressions for this cup. There will be people that will tell you you did it wrong. There will be people who will tell you you did it right. You can get cups that taste better than other cups. I'm sure you've seen this yourself. But every cup you create is a data point, and it basically, you create a library, so when you get gifted the next bag of coffee, you can build from that library and hopefully get to places on the curve faster that you personally enjoy. So, not a test. Take your time, explore the coffee space, and enjoy.